Friday morning podcast.
That's right, man. Twice in 1 week. What's happening in here?
Oof. You must be going
crazy. I am. I will be at a franchise conference, my first ever. I don't even know how to behave. I'm used to fitness conferences where you just work out all the time and you walk around in a singlet and get hammered and do push-up contests.
Do that at this. Isn't it just going to be all suits?
Probably a bunch of suits.
You're going to wear your tuxedo or tuxedo t-shirt?
Tuxedo t-shirt, yeah. I mean, I'm going formal, but it's casual. It's like comfortable formal, athletic formal.
Can you help me with the Pam?
This Pam thing, please? What? You're the idiot in the tuxedo. That's what they're going to say to me.
This is a job to clean toilets.
I'm going to wear a sport coat over it, though, so that'll make it look good.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Classy.
Yeah, well, that'd be kind of weird, though, like a sport coat over top. Anyway, whatever.
With Air Force Ones?
Yeah, that's kind of a thing now, right?
Yeah.
Hell, even Steve Harvey's doing it. Like, I was watching dinner the other night, put on Family Feud, and he's rocking him, he's always got these nice suits on, rocking athletic shoes, like white sneakers with a suit. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Pull it off.
Yeah, I don't know. Just got a derogatory text from my son. He's like in his mid-20s, and he's like, those pants you wear all the time, that must be the de facto dad travel pant, because I'm at the airport and everybo's got them on. I was like, whatever.
What, are you 50 now?
51. I'll be 52 in November.
When does your Air Monarchs come in?
The Air Dad 8s. Yeah. I don't know. They look really comfortable, though.
Is that like 55 or?
Well, and the thing is, yeah. And I mean, you can get a good deal on them, I'm just trying to think of the practicality of them. It's like you got one pair that's green that you cut the grass in, and you got your Sunday pair that's like really white.
No, there's one pair, and you wear it everywhere.
No. You got to have multiple pairs.
No,
if you're going to dad,
you're not ready. You're not ready.
You're right. I'm not ready. You're not ready.
Multiple pairs.
Clearly, you're not ready. What is this? Who spends this? Who's wasteful spending like this? I'm going to be on that Geico. Is it Geico or I can't remember the insurance company commercial where it's like
where you turn your parents.
Turn it into your parents. Yeah.
Those are great, man. The parking lot one. You seen that one?
Oh yeah.
How much money they're making here? Enough of the parking lot.
Right. I was out with a buddy of mine last night, and he's 59 or 58, and he's a young guy. I mean, he's fit and everything, but he's 58. So he's like, the waitress comes over and he introduces herself and gives her his name, and I'm like, the waitress doesn't need to know your name. Nobody cares. Right? You woke up early. Nobody cares, right? Yeah. Those are awesome. But to get on with some business talk today.
Business talk, let's get it.
I'm rereading an amazing book, and it inspired this post today. And this is basically just general entrepreneurship advice. And the book is called Decisive by Dan and Chip Heath.
Great book.
Amazing. I like all their stuff. Switch, Made to Stick, Decisive. They had another one that I really liked as well. I just can't recall it right now. But in the book, they basically talk about how people make decisions typically, right? Like the behavioral science behind what we normally do, and then why most of it is flawed, right? And so we're going to go through, what they name to be the 4 villains of decision making.
Yep.
Maybe give some examples through our lens in our industry, and then also what are the anecdotes to those? So what can you do about it, right?
Cool. You ready?
I'm so ready.
I'm a great lister. I can read off this list. Right. Number 1.
Did you write them down?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Prepared today.
I'm ready. Number
1, narrow framing.
Yes, and everyone does this. Narrow framing is essentially when you look at the solution to a problem through a very narrow lens, obviously, right? And so an example would be when you look at a problem, and this is very typical of everyone, and by the way, these decisions are not just business. These can be in your personal life as well. We all have a tendency to narrow frame. And in most cases, what that means is you come up with a binary answer. It's either this or that.
Yep.
And in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily an or, it can be an and, right? So examples I can think of is, and this has happened to, I think, every organization before, is if let's say you have someone on the team and that person is in the wrong seat, right? And maybe we've talked about the Welch grid before where they're a good culture fit, but they're just in the wrong seats. Maybe they're a low performer. So, or maybe something's happened where, they're really abrasive, but they perform their job really well, but they're, they seem to be not a good culture fit. So that's a different, quadrant, if you will. And then you would say, should I fire this person or not?
Just keep them or get rid of them. Yeah. It's real simple, right?
Get rid of them. Should we keep them? Should we get rid of them? And you just start perseverating over this like one decision, and it only has 2 outcomes. But I think it's logical when you shed light on it that there is more than one decision. Maybe this person doesn't need to be in the role that they're in. Maybe if they excel at, say, numbers and spreadsheets and things of that nature, but they're not great customer facing, maybe there's a spot for them in your company. Maybe they're in the wrong seat, right? Maybe they are the right culture fit. They're really nice, but they're underperforming. Maybe that person's in the wrong seat, right? Or maybe there's a way to do both things. Like, hey,
maybe there's a way to train them more.
Yeah, go figure, right? But I mean, yeah, exactly. That's a different conversation maybe, but it's not always binary.
Options,
right? And I think, expanding your options up to a certain extent is a good thing. Even adding one more option can drastically, like they've got, the great thing about the book, and it would be like, it'd take forever to spout off all the stories and stats that they give us.
Right.
But the interesting thing about the book is just adding one option to your decision-making process will infinitely increase your chances of making a good decision, right? So instead of this and that, it should be this and that, or how about this, right? And that could be a combo of the two. It could be a completely different decision. I think some of the studies, and I'll probably butcher this right now, but one of the things that was interesting was, like someone standing in a stereo store and it's like, or a TV store, and they're like, should I buy this like Mac Daddy TV or should I buy this one, right? And this one's a little above my budget, but has all these extra features, or this one. And the sales associate in the story in the book says, well, you could buy this one or that one, most expensive or middle of the road,
right?
Or you could buy middle of the road and use the additional money to buy some DVDs. And that's the era that the book was written in, right? Literally, that's probably the dumbest, if you think about it, the simplest, right? Solution. You're kind of like, well, duh. But I mean, literally, people get stuck. It's a really small example of how people get stuck in it, this or that, right? And it's like, well, why don't you go this? And then you can use the additional money to do these things. It's like, oh, yeah, right? So think about that through our lens. It's like, okay, when we're deciding, membership prices or service offerings or marketing plays, right? Or if you're deciding something in your personal life, maybe you're dating someone and you're like, should I do this or should I do that? It's like, well, maybe there's something in between, right?
Right.
So anyway, narrow framing was the first villain of decision making, and there's a lot of ways that we all go about it. So the anecdote to that, I think they call it widen your scope. Yeah, it's widen your options. So just giving yourself more options. So typically it's only a few more options, because we've talked about, the research shows that if you have more than somewhere between 6 and 20 options, people are more scared to make the wrong decision than they are to make the right decision. So the fear of making the wrong decision overwhelms them, and they don't make any decisions. That goes back to the study from Switch, where they sold jams in the grocery store, right?
All right, there's
a 24 jam table versus the 6 jam table, and the 6 jam table had less traffic, but at the cash register, the proof was in the pudding. More people bought from the 6 jam table, because the 24, even if it was something as simple as jam, it's not a life-changing, investment. But at the same time, the fear of picking the wrong jam just had people, just freeze your brain and you just walk off.
It's rough in the grocery store, man.
It's tough in there. Should I get the eggplant?
So many different barbecue sauces.
I don't know. It's true, right? And we all think we want choice, but it's not a lot of choice. Right. So when you're considering any decision, whether it be in your personal life or your business, it's not always this or, it can be and. And if you just add one or maybe more, choices to your decision tree, you're going to make a much better decision.
Great. All right. Number 2, confirmation bias.
Oh man, this is a yeah. God, can you even imagine? That we would ever have any confirmation bias, Matt, based on what's going on right now in the political climate?
I don't think so. I think everybody's really looks at all their options and they choose the right.
They can understand all points of view, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. Literally, our attention is being monetized, and confirmation bias is such a strong, it's a thing, right? It's such a strong,
even more so, man,
presence in everyone that they literally monetize it by, on digital media platforms, showing you things that they know that are going to make you watch it longer, which means they're going to show you things that you like to watch.
Right.
Whether it's something that would upset you or something that would agree with you, they're going to figure that out. And it's all based on confirmation bias, period. And man, this is one that's really hard in our business, because, if you like something, let's say you're getting ready to make a big business decision, right? There is something that you want, right? There is an assumption that you're making, whether you like it or not. And when you go to do what in your mind is valid research, you really have to be careful not to only look at things that reinforce what you want to happen. And that is, and keep in mind, you guys, this is absolutely natural behavior. And it's confirmation bias is so strong that even psychological researchers that understand it, that study it, admit that they can't avoid it. So the idea would be, and I think what's the anecdote that they have in the book? So to reality test your assumptions. And part of that means take a step back, right? And understand that you're probably not going to avoid it. No one is. So, but just knowing that you can't avoid it will make you, test your assumptions harder, right? So again, this happens. What's interesting about this happens on big corporate teams where they have this initiative, but before they do it, they're going to do all this market research and everything else. When that's studied by a third party who doesn't have a vested interest, even that ends up featuring a lot of confirmation bias.
Sure.
Because everybody knows where they want to go.
Right.
Right.
I see it a lot probably, you're talking about social media and stuff, but I see it a lot through the people that you work with, right? People like being around people that think similar to them, and they, you're like, oh yeah, it's a great idea. That's, kind of stuff like,
right.
Easily. So it's big corporations is small, right? That's why it's good to have that person on your team. Well, I don't forget the,
the six.
Yeah. The six.
I just talked about that. I did a presentation for the Hermosi's coaching group.
Yeah.
On leadership. And one of the questions that was lobbed out beforehand was, what do you do with people on your team that don't agree? I'm like, embrace them.
Yeah.
Because, the story goes, and if you've heard it before, I apologize, but if you haven't, it's really interesting. We use the Enneagram here as one of our ways to figure out like what people's lens is on the world. It just helps you understand people better, right? And so there's one Enneagram. It's 1 through 9. None are wrong. They're just basically how you're wired, how you see the world. Well, there's one called a 6, and a 6 is if I put the 6 lens over like a business, it's the person where I'm at the conference table and we're like, all right, we're launched this new initiative and we're super psyched. And everyone at the table's like, oh yeah, rock on, it's gonna be amazing. You've got all these like woo woo, people, right? Fist bumps,
right?
And there's that one person who's like raises their hand. It's like, yeah, what do you got? And it's like, well, if we do that, we run the risk of upsetting this, or
right.
We could. And you're just like, and that's the person for me personally. That person drives me crazy, right?
Yeah. Because you're usually the guy driving the boat.
Right. So I'm like trying to drive this big vision. I've got in my mind, I've got Debbie Downer over here who's like, poo-pooing on all my decisions.
Everything.
What is wrong with you? And everybody else is swept up in the,
right.
In the party or the excitement of the new decision. And the one person's like, well, hold on. I don't know about that one. Here's the funny thing. They told a story in a article I read about the Enneagram, and they studied a group of chimpanzees, and I don't know, what do you call a group? Squad? I don't know.
Monkeys.
Yeah. A bunch of monkeys together. A barrel of monkeys. So they study this pride maybe of chimpanzees, and I think
that's it.
Whatever. Gaggle.
Okay.
Flock. In this group of chimpanzees, they observed them for some time, and they identified that some of the chimpanzees were what they defined as anxious. So imagine that, like you've got a community of chimpanzees living together, and some of them are always like making noise, and it's like, and the rest of the chimps are clearly irritated by it. It's like, God, we're just trying to eat and have sex and have a good party over here. Like, could you just chill, right? So they observed them for a while to identify the anxious chimps. They removed the anxious chimps from the group. 1 year later, all the other chimps were dead. All of them.
Didn't have old Debbie Downer.
Right. Who's in the tree yelling Jaguar, right? No one.
Right.
So, in an answer to that question, and for confirmation bias, it's really nice to have that person on your team that's like, hold on. Because everybody else on the team, if especially if you've hired through the lens of confirmation bias, where you only hire people you like, which, by the way, means they're going to be a lot like you, also a bad idea, right?
Which you will do unknowingly.
Yeah.
That's why we do the Enneagram.
Yeah, 100%. And so that person's very valuable. So you should embrace them. And I mean, if you think about the role that person should be in, it's probably like finance or, something where it's a little bit of checks and balances where you're like, I'm growth minded. So it's full steam ahead. Let's blow this thing up. And then someone's in the back saying, yeah, hold on, man. Like, yeah, let's just pump the brakes a minute, right? So I would say to embrace that person. But that's one way, a great point to prevent confirmation bias, right?
Yep.
Is to have other people on your team that will test you, or in your life that will test your decisions relevantly And it's going to be a little irritating, but just understand that that's a very important person for you, right?
And
that may help you
if you are that person.
Yeah, rock on. And of course, through the lens of the Enneagram, they say as long as they're healthy. So you don't like literally want to be a Debbie Downer. Like you have, like if your ultimate concern is for the entity or for the person that you're talking to and for their well-being, it's fine. But if you're just the person that's like, ooh, all the time,
womp, womp, womp.
Yeah, that can be a bit. So you can be a healthy or not healthy,
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
All right. That's confirmation bias. Avoid it if you can.
All right. Number 3, short-term emotion.
Yeah, short-term emotion would be, again, it's as if you have a spreadsheet in front of you and the numbers never change, but depending on the time of the day or what information you've just, taken in or how you feel or whether you're hungry or whether you're tired, you see the information, you feel different about the information.
In the heat of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we did, in that ridiculous drinking party we had called 30 Years in the Industry, I literally had one of the finer points called F your feelings because, feelings are temporary. They're not you. The feelings that you have about the situation are not the situation, right? And you really have to understand that. And so in the book, they had a really great story because the antidote, let me back up a sec. The antidote is to attain distance. So that means just, try to take a step back, zoom out a little bit, right? And look at the problem, like get some literally physical distance. If it's a person, distance from it. You can't really make a good decision when you're in the weeds and you're emotional about it.
Sure.
I mean, think about all the like silly anecdotes that are like, well, let's just sleep on it. Well, that's probably a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't make a decision after dark, or it's probably a good idea because you're not in the right frame of mind. So using short-term emotion
after dark.
Nothing good, I can tell you. Do you really want to know? You don't want to know. In my house, sleep. Maybe before dark, depends on the night. We are wild.
Yeah.
But, one of the stories they used in the book, just to show you how even big companies can do it, is they talked about Intel. And at one point, Intel was in the memory business. And that was their core business, was memory, right? And so lo and behold, that vertical started being attacked by Japanese companies. And, they were sending sort of like representatives or spies, if you will, over to visit these Japanese manufacturers who were building these memory chips. And the stories coming back were like, they have gone all in. It's unbelievable. The efficiency that they have. They have a whole floor dedicated to 64, 64 byte. They've got a whole floor dedicated to 256. They got a whole floor dedicated to 128.
Right.
Like they're going to kill us here, right? And they could already see it. And some of their market share started to be, disrupted. And they also, at the same time, were starting to work with processing, right? And starting to build processors. And so, what they were stuck with in Intel's, they had this narrow frame decision that also was very emotional. And they didn't know how, they couldn't decide. Do we exit, the memory business and go full processing? And of course, it depends on who you're talking to on your team as well, right? So the principals of the company got together. And, they were just literally, I think this was like final hour over a beer. And one of them simply said, listen, if we were fired today and a new CEO walked in here, what would they do? And they all said that was just enough emotional attachment for everyone on the team to agree they would abandon memory and go full on into processing.
Right.
Right. So they go back to their sales team and they're like, listen, we're not selling memory anymore. And they're like, what? Because that's what we do. This is terrible. This is a terrible idea. And of course, the sales team goes to their customers and they're like, hey, we're getting out of the memory business. We're going into processing. And most of the customers responded with, well, it's about time. We were wondering when you're going to do that. Basically, like we could see the writing on the wall, but they're so emotional about it.
Yeah.
They're so tied to what they've always done. And how many people do we see, certainly in the fitness space, that are so tied to what they do, right?
Right.
Again, it goes back to, well, I don't know. I don't want to get into that story. It could be too long.
Yeah. I mean, a good one that I thought about with this one is the pandemic and how, right when it hit off, everybody abandoned their brick and mortars and went straight like virtual and everything. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like that really made a big impact and nobody really knew, and they're emotional and they're like, oh, and I can only imagine that has really disrupted their business now.
100%. Great point, because you're right. I mean, it was a short-term decision based on emotions where you looked at the market and said, all right, I'm going full on online training and I'm going to sell my gym. I'm going to go all in. And now what we see, if you study the IHRSA results, which for you guys that don't know, is sort of the governing body for the fitness industry, they're showing that visitations to health facilities are where they were in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a massive swing back to brick and mortar. We saw it in our corporate gyms, and our franchisees saw it where, like, when the veil was lifted a bit from COVID, just people started just coming back, and they started saying things like, man, I need to talk to real people, like to work out in my basement or my house. I don't want to do this anymore. Right. So, and you saw temporary things like the stock of, Peloton, like going through the roof. Now it's back,
Right, yeah.
And Peloton had been around since 2012. So it's almost like a new thing. So very temporary. But if you only used short-term emotion to make a decision, you could have blown up your whole business model on something that lasted 14 months.
Right.
Not a great idea. So great point.
Yeah.
All right. What's our last one?
Last one, overconfidence.
Yeah, overconfidence would be, I think there's some kind of statement that I don't remember, which is basically like your past successes are your worst enemy kind of idea. I think the best way to illustrate this from a big company standpoint is a story they used in the book, which is there's a guy that worked for Coke, and I can't remember his name, but he's the guy who put the deal together for Gatorade, right? When you go, geez, I mean, they bought Gatorade for hundreds of millions, but it ended up being worth just, I don't know what Gatorade's worth, but it's got to be billions,
deals
right?
ever, right?
Best deals. Yeah, it's one of the best deals ever made, right? So this guy is sort of like an advertising agency. Like, I'm the one that did the cow for, Chick-fil-A or something. You hang your hat on this, like, bam, you got this one-hit wonder, right?
The man, baby.
And that would then, cause you, obviously, when you approached a new acquisition, you would certainly be overconfident, certainly if you were that person, because you're batting 1,000, you're the smartest guy ever, right? So this guy, they reach a point in Coca-Cola where they need to do an acquisition. They start looking at things. And he lands on Snapple as this thing that he really wants to buy, right? And they look at, they basically used all 4 villains in this deal, but they narrow framed do we buy Snapple or not? It wasn't like, did we buy other things? It was like they got onto Snapple and it was this or not. But one of the biggest factors was their overconfidence, and not just it was in the fact that this individual who was seen as a savant, right, was saying, yeah, Snapple's a good deal. And as it turns out, it was one of the worst ever. It's still discussed in business classes as one of the worst ever acquisitions, right? Surprisingly, in the book, and I wouldn't have thought this was true, it's something like 83% of acquisitions don't add value to shareholders.
Wow.
So even big companies, they run through these 4 villains, and one of them is their overconfidence, especially if you've hit a home run or two. You just blindly go into something and you think you've got it all figured out, right? So the anecdote to that, the way is just prepare to be wrong. I think, like, for us as an example, before we didn't just have one facility that was doing really well, like, Rick's Burger Shop, and then we're like, man, we have a line out the door, let's franchise this thing. It's like, yeah, but you could be in the right neighborhood, or, you have to really prepare to be completely wrong. And so what did we do? Well, we started licensing, right? So we licensed all these clubs, and we got to see how franchising worked because we were working with franchises, and we got to see what scaled in market and what didn't. And then we literally 5 years ago opened a very similar model to what we wanted to franchise, right? So it's like, well, if we're going to screw it up, I'd rather do it now, right? And that's one way to mitigate that, to prepare to be wrong. And I think if you're making a big decision, even personally, I think if you'd have to ask yourself, can you live with the downside? Like, what's the worst case scenario, and can I live with it?
Right.
Would I survive it?
Pros and cons list, right?
Yeah, basically. And even pros and cons can be, skewed if you really want to do something, right? Because you're only going, again,
it's all pros, baby.
It is. It's all confirmation bias, right? So
Snapple's the one.
Yeah, well, that's why short-term emotion, I think they use pros and cons too, is like, we'll do it over several weeks, not just like bam, right when you're pumped about
10
something.
minutes. Yep, that's good.
That's good. Let's spend $1 billion. So yeah, I mean, overconfidence is just prepare to be wrong. Like, you're gonna swing and miss sometimes, right? You can mitigate that, but overconfidence is a kiss of death. And I think you see this a lot. A lot of times it happens if somebody's very successful in one vertical, then they go hop in another vertical in business and they just flop.
Right.
It's like, well, just because you did great in the waste management business, right, and sold your company, doesn't mean you're going to be able to get into painting and kill it. You might, but those two things don't always line up, right? So your overconfidence in your abilities based on this, and it could have been based on luck or market conditions or timing, or there was a guy Kawasaki talked about timing.
Yeah.
It's like, you'd be nuts to be overconfident. You'd have to prepare to be wrong in every scenario. So those are the 4 villains: narrow framing, confirmation bias, short-term emotion, and overconfidence. And the anecdotes are: widen your options, reality test your assumptions, attain distance, and prepare to be wrong.
It's great stuff as always.
All right, brother. Appreciate it.